Every journey begins with a single step. For our friend, the hydrogen atom, that step is a bold leap from being part of a water molecule to an emissary of energy. In the heart of an electrolysis chamber, powered by renewable energy, water is transformed. Oxygen steps back, releasing the vibrant hydrogen atom. Alone, hydrogen is volatile, but when paired with captured CO2 and the help of a touch of alchemy, together, they forge a potent synthetic fuel. A new energy carrier, clean, efficient, ready to power our world. Innovative companies are investing in the production of e-fuels, which can then be distributed via the existing infrastructure to industry and consumers, providing them with a climate-friendly alternative to conventional fossil fuels. Aviation, maritime, heavy goods transport, even your car, e-fuels power a wide range of sectors and offer a sustainable solution to our diverse energy and mobility needs. We at the eFuel Alliance embrace the entire value chain and give it a face and a voice. Our goal is political acceptance and regulatory consideration of e-fuels as a significant contribution to sustainable climate protection. In the quest for green energy, e-fuels are an essential piece of the puzzle, linking today's infrastructure to a more sustainable future. The eFuel Alliance is powering this transition, forging a path from hydrogen to hope, because the future of energy is now.
And a warm welcome from my side to our third episode of REDIII implementation. We have already covered the details of the REDIII implementation in Finland and Portugal in February, and in our last webinar, the details of Poland and Czechia. You find all the recordings in our YouTube channel. Today, I'm quite honored to have two representatives from Germany and the Netherlands online, and we will dive into the details of the REDIII transposition in these countries with a special focus on the transport sector. Before that, as usual, please allow me to have a few minutes on advertising the eFuel Alliance. The eFuel Alliance is a trade association advocating for the use of synthetic fuels across different sectors. We now have 170 members from different areas, interesting startups, big companies like Honeywell and Siemens Energy, classical fuel and gas companies like Exxon, Repsol, or Neste. We have also RFNBO producers. We count around 25 project developers and RFNBO producers in our alliance, and then different off-takers. From the road, yes, this is still a topic, and we will hear later more, like BMW, like Porsche, and also from aviation and maritime sector. We are focusing on European legislation, but we have members across the globe. Just lately, Toyota has joined us as our 11th member from Japan. Our main goal is, of course, to initiate a market ramp up of e-fuels, hydrogen derivatives, or how we call it in the European legislative language, RFNBOs, renewable fuels of non-biological origin. For that reason, we need attractive business models. We need more final investment decisions. In March, we have published our study with Porsche Consulting, where we have analyzed more than 500 hydrogen projects. Just 6% have an FID at the moment. That's too low. And for that, we are working on a better policy framework. In general, our policy strategy is quite demand-driven. So our key regulation is the Renewable Energy Directive. And the Renewable Energy Directive is setting binding mandates for RFNBOs in the transport and in the industries sector. Just as a reminder, here's a chart where the legislators have agreed on in summer 2023. The member states shall achieve a GHG reduction of 14.5% in the transport sector, or an renewable energy share of 29%. The energy share does include multipliers. For that reason, it's much higher than the GHG reduction. When it comes to RFNBOs, we have a combined quota of advanced biofuels of NX9A and RFNBOs of 5.5%. Within that, a binding subquota of 1%. Both of the member states we hear later more have introduced more ambitious RFNBO quotas, and we are of course interested in hearing more about that approach. Also, the industry sector, there are binding RFNBO targets of 42% in 2030 of all industry players consuming hydrogen and 60% in 2035. This is a bit challenging at the moment. There are not many member states who have presented plans how they want to achieve it. One exemption is the Netherlands, and I'm looking forward to hear more about that. In addition, we have quite restrictive production rules for RFNBOs. If you want to produce these fuels, you have to make sure that the electricity comes from new installations which are not older than 36 months. You need a temporal correlation monthly until 2030, then hourly. The use of subsidized renewable electricity is not allowed. It also has to be in the same bidding zone. When it comes to CO2 sources, we have a limitation of the use of industrial point sources until 2041, and it needs to be an effective carbon pricing which does not exist outside of Europe. All of these conditions, each by each, makes hydrogen more expensive and is excluding production sites. With that, hydrogen stays unaffordable and also can just be used in niches. We want to change that. For that reason, we have strongly advocated since more than 2 years for an early revision of the delegated acts. We were happy that the Commission announced an Accelerate EU, I think it was in May this year, that they would like to present a proposal by end of June. It's already mid of June and we haven't seen anything. Yesterday, DG Ener has confirmed that they will postpone it to until the summer break. This is, of course, quite unfortunate. Nobody will sign offtake agreements when you expect better prices with a revised production criteria legislation. And for that reason, everyone is waiting on this new proposal. And the proposal could be rejected by the Parliament and Council. So every month we wait. Make it harder to reach the targets for 2030, not just for the Renewable Energy Directive, but also for the ReFuelEU Aviation. And we will later discuss that, of course, in our Q&A session as well. The current status of the REDIII transport implementation is that we see more and more greener countries. I would say, there's just 1/3 of countries left which have only drafts or not present as legislative text. Germany implemented the REDIII implementation in March. We will hear later more about this. Also the Netherlands a few months before. We are still waiting for the final text in Spain and France. Some details are missing here. In Sweden, there are discussions also across associations if Sweden has implemented it completely or not. There are definitely details missing. However, our opinion is that the Swedish government thinks they have fully implemented REDIII, and with high shares of renewable fuels in the market, they are confident that they will meet the targets. When it comes to the RFNBO targets, which will define the market size for RFNBOs in the transport sector, we have quite a different picture across Europe. We have some countries being more ambitious. For example, Finland was also one of the first countries with a 4% RFNBO target in 2030. That's quite ambitious. In Spain, we are currently discussing 2.5%. In Belgium, there's a latest leak with 2%. Also, Ireland has targets up to 2% in discussion. So a lot of member states are doing more than they would have to do. When we are looking back, we had quite a different or difficult debate about RFNBO quotas. Initially, the Commission proposed 2.6% in 2030, which will trigger, according to the fuel consumption in Europe in 2030, a bit more than 50 terawatt hours. After the war in Ukraine has started and we had a discussion about resilience and independence of energy imports, the Commission proposed to increase the RFNBO quota for the transport sector to 5%, which is closer to 200 terawatt hours. I think we would have a total different dynamic in the market if we are talking about 200 terawatt hours of RFNBO needed by 2030. Then, and this is the biggest disappointment, at least for me, in the whole Green Deal, that it was negotiated down to 1%. And the member states in the Council also brought back the energetic target, and with that, the multipliers. And if we reduce the double counting for RFNBOs and also the additional multiplier for RFNBOs in maritime and aviation, we have ended up with around 10 to 15 terawatt hours. Thanks to the more ambitious RED III national implementation, we are back at currently 35 terawatt hours. We could also have been somewhere else if we would have agreed on more ambitious targets. When we look into the different member states, then you find here the RFNBO, the amount of RFNBOs which will be needed according to the forecasted fuel consumption in 2030 and the agreed RFNBO quota. So, for example, in Germany, the 1.5% according to our knowledge will lead to around 6 terawatt hours. On top, if the aviation sector is not covered in the RED III, we have added the fuel demand for the ReFuelEU Aviation. The good story is that we can be confident that there will be an industrialized market for RFNBOs by 2030 with 35 terawatt hours, which is approximately 2.4 billion liter diesel equivalent. We will be able to realize a lot of projects. This is also possible because these binding targets are covered with high penalties for non-compliance. So there is an economic interest to produce these fuels instead of paying the penalties. But also here we have a super fragmented market across Europe. We have penalties from 11.5 euro per gigajoule in Poland. If you want to hear the reasons why Poland has implemented or discussed such low penalties, I recommend to watch our recordings from the last webinar. Until penalties which are in discussions in Belgium of up to 132 euro per gigajoule, which is a CO2 price of approximately 1,400 euro per ton. I don't know any target market where you could have such high CO2 prices. So it definitely makes sense to invest, especially in Germany. We have the case that we have also a triple counting for RFNBOs. And for the market price of the GHG reduction quota, you can multiply it by 3. And this is currently, in my opinion, the most attractive market for RFNBOs. Also, the RED III implementation is confirming us that these quotas and mandates are really working. We see a lot of FIDs currently in the refinery sector. The latest update of the International Energy Agency has confirmed that approximately 60% of the hydrogen investments are going to the refinery sector at the moment. Shell, for example, is constructing 200 megawatt in the Rotterdam refinery and another 100 megawatt in the Rhineland refinery. Repsol ordered 200 megawatt. Moevo ordered, I think it was 300 megawatt. There are also examples for Total Energies in Antwerp. So we see that this market is working and investments are taking place. And with that, I hope I could give you a good first overview about the developments and the impact of the RED III implementation. And with that, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Christoph Schrey. He's working in the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, and he's their policy officer for hydrogen policy and national hydrogen strategy. Christoph, we are keen to hear more about the German RED III implementation.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
I'm just about to share my presentation. This one. Yes, Christoph Schrey from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. You already mentioned it. Okay, now it should work. You see the presentation?
It works finally. You
Yes,
can go
okay.
on.
Yeah, thank you. Just a little in the beginning, in Germany, the main responsibility for the implementation of the in the Ministry of Environment, but I was responsible as the counterpart in our ministry for especially for the RFNBO quota. Yeah, first of all, we have a new government since a little bit more than a year, I think a year and 2 months or something. And we had, in the last year, we had monitoring of the so-called Energiewende, of our energy transition, which includes also the hydrogen sector. And especially in the hydrogen sector, we saw a delay of the market ramp up, as you know, and the current government is no longer counting on the so-called national hydrogen strategy that was made under the previous government and the government before, because the demands that were prognosed there were probably too high or too early. And so the monitoring in the last year projected demands that are likely to be lower and will materialize later than expected, with quite a big range between 150 and 650 terawatt hours per year in 2045. Regarding the hydrogen ramp up, the government has decided to promote a flexible and more pragmatic and also cost-efficient market ramp up, with a concentration on the markets with high willingness to pay higher prices, such as the refinery sector, and not the industry sector we can talk about later. Also, a focus is on the reduction of overly complex requirements and criteria. I have also a slide to the RFNBO DA you mentioned before. And focus on the domestic production and also the pipeline-based imports, because we still think that the majority of the German demand will be met by imports. And of course, the infrastructure, we working on the hydrogen core network and the import corridors as to meet our demands, but also because we are in the middle of Europe, we will play a big role in the European hydrogen backbone. So with that said, the implementing of the RED transportation target was decided in the German Parliament 23rd of April this year, and the quotas are effective retroactively as of January 1st this year. There was a discussion to include also aviation and maritime fuels, but it was decided not to include them, but to stay with the separate European-wide rules we have with the FuelEU Maritime and ReFuelEU Aviation. So this one is just for the road and rail transportation. other than it was necessary after the REDIII III, we decided to make a reliable long-term pathway until 2040. That was also a great demand from the industry, and we got a lot of applause for this one because after the REDIII it would have been only for the next year, so not enough for to take FIDs. Then we had the sub-quota for RFNBO with the triple multiplier. You also already mentioned it. So that means if you use RFNBO, it counts 3 times against the GHG quota until 2037. Then it melts down until 2040. Then it's 1-on-1. And RFNBO can be, of course, everything that meets the RFNBO DA delegated act. So it can be like green hydrogen in gaseous form. It can be the liquid hydrogen or any kind of e-fuels that meet the criteria. And we have a quite high penalty. You already showed it before. I also saw in the chat that this was the first question about the high penalty. Where does it come from? We had a lot of statements also from the industries, from the associations about this. In the beginning, we were counting with a much lower penalty, but the most important thing, or the most important condition for the penalty is that it is high enough to not just be paid. Yeah, if it's too low, like I guess in Poland, then it's much cheaper for the industry to just pay it and not really use RFNBOs. So this penalty, 120 euro per gigajoule, would translate to about, I think, about 30 euro per kilogram hydrogen. So this is a penalty that is, in our view, really high enough so renewable hydrogen is really used. Also, we have a speciality that is not in the REDIII. Starting in 2031, you could use electrolytic low carbon hydrogen. So as you know, after the low carbon delegated act, it's possible to use to make to use your electrolyzer with electricity from the grid, and then depending on the share of renewable energy in your grid, you can have a certain percentage that is RFNBO and a certain percentage that is low carbon hydrogen. And to create a market also for this low carbon hydrogen, we included it in the GHG quota here. And of course, we will have to convince the other member states and the European Union to do that as well when we are revising the REDIII with the REDIII IV, which should begin at the end of the year. Also, the law provides for improvements in fraud prevention and regulatory oversight and implements of the refuel aviation. I don't want to talk too much about that today, but about the quota. So here you see the blue line. The darker blue line is the GHG quota. Starting this year already with 12%, and then going up progressively until 2040 with 65%. Percent of what? It is the total energy consumption in the transportation sector. Also, this transportation, the energy consumption will go down over time. Due to bigger effectiveness. So you sometimes see, if you look at the last line here, the demand can go down a little bit, even though the percentage stays the same. Then the light blue is the RFNBO quota. Doesn't look so big here because of the scale, but actually it starts with 0.1, but then it goes up quite steeply in the early 30s. and until 10% until 2040. And then the last line, the black line, is the RFNBO demand in terawatt hours, which you can see on the bottom, starting with 0.6 terawatt hours this and next year, and then progressively going up, also like the quota is also in the beginning of the 30s, and then until 28 terawatt hours in 2040. Yeah, here on this slide you see, as I mentioned before, the GHG quota is only viable for road and rail transportation. The first small steps before 2030 will be used probably in the refineries. So the first 4 to 5 terawatt hours, and then later, beginning with the 2030s, when it's going up quite fast, we will have more and more direct use of RFNBOs in the transportation sector. But then here we cumulated also the demands that are coming from the ReFuelEU Aviation and the FuelEU Maritime. Especially the aviation part will go up in mid-30s and also make a substantial demand. And yeah, the FuelEU Maritime has lower percentages, and also the German ports have only small quantities of bunker fuel compared to other European seaports, of course, the Netherlands and Belgium. So that doesn't really do a lot of difference in Germany. So together, if you count all together, we have about 9 terawatt hours in 2030 and 37 terawatt hours in 2040. Okay, then to wrap up, here I have a last slide on the current discussions regarding the adjustment of the RFNBO-DA. Tobias Block already mentioned it. We already, under the last government, we asked for a adjustment, and at the before the regulatory forum in Rotterdam in spring, we had a joint letter together with the Netherlands also, and Austria, Spain, and others. And the European Commission afterwards promised to make a draft before the summer, or end of June was the date. But yeah, then they postponed it until after the summer. We don't know any more reasons for that, so yeah, I can't really say anything to that. But yeah, it's official, the letter, so I can also show it here. These are the 3 points we had in this joint letter. The extension of the transitional period for additionality until 2040. Also the extension of the transitional period for the temporal correlation, and we asked for assessment of the so-called sunset clause. So if you have a very, very big share of renewable energies in your electricity system, and you don't need to meet this criteria anymore. Thank you very much, and I'm open for your questions.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. We will keep all the questions for the Q&A later.
Yes, of course, sorry.
After we have heard the presentation by Dirk van Hoorn from the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. Dirk, the stage is yours. I'm happy to hear your RED III implementation.
Thank you very much, Tobias, and also Christoph, for your overview. Working at the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy on the hydrogen team for some years now, I also represent my colleagues from the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, who are responsible for the implementation of the mobility quota in the RED, and also the implementation and transposition of the ReFuelEU mandates for maritime and aviation. But for this presentation, I will mainly focus on the targets that we have in the REDIII, and if there's any specific questions on the refuel mandates in the Q&A, I can look into those then. I will first present an overview of what instruments we're currently developing to ramp up the use of RFNBOs, focusing on the industry and transport sectors, because we are still very much busy with the instrument mix that the Netherlands has in mind to reach the targets for 2030. I think it's very good to see that our neighboring countries are already planning on quota until 2040, and I want to clarify from the outset out that we are also already working on quota until 2035, 2040, or maybe even later. And those discussions are currently underway. So we hope to follow our neighbors' example quite soon, but currently that's still under discussion. So I'll focus now on what's already been implemented or is currently under negotiation or implementation discussions with Parliament or the European Commission. And that's mainly the policies that we're currently implementing for the 2030 targets. So the main point in the Dutch industry instrument mix is that we combine supply and demand side measures. We started already in 2020 when our hydrogen strategy came out with a focus on the supply side, which is both focusing on the production through ramp up of electrolysis capacity, as the development of import terminals and the import volumes that are necessary to meet our own demand. Currently, the Netherlands is already importing a substantial share of its energy demand, so that is something that we see happening in the future as well. And for the electrolysis capacity, we are developing, or we have in place, a scheme for CAPEX and OPEX subsidies. We already have 2 tenders quite successfully, and aiming for 1.2 gigawatts of capacity by 2030. And in addition, when it comes to the imports, we are working also closely together with our German colleagues on a tender with their H2 Global mechanism to have imports of hydrogen carriers in the Netherlands by shortly after 2030. And apart from the H2 Global mechanism, also working on direct subsidies for import terminals to have the infrastructure ready to actually bring those volumes to customers. And apart from these instruments focusing on supply, we've been working on the hydrogen infrastructure in the Netherlands together with GasUnie for a couple of years now, and we're expecting in the next year to have a decision on the final planning and tariff, the final tariffs for this infrastructure up until the end of the subsidy period, somewhere in 2030. So with the supply in place, the main focus of our future policies is on the demand side. As we've learned over the last couple of years that only supply stimulus isn't enough for substantial FIDs. And as Toby has already mentioned, we have, you mentioned the example of Shell, which are currently developing a big electrolyzer in the Netherlands. We've got also REDIII since last summer took an FID, and we've concluded that the main driver of those FIDs is basically the mobility quota under the RED and the national transposition of that, combined with a subsidy to cover the first risks. So these demand side quota and the demand side policies are really the main driving force of new investments. So we're working on that. The RED transposition for the transport sector is currently in place. It is a combination of a blending obligation for fuel suppliers, and I will elaborate a bit on that later, and a CAPEX subsidy for refueling stations and the purchase of trucks, for example, to directly incentivize the use of RFNBOs in road transport. And the colleagues of the Ministry of Infrastructure are also besides these REDIII policies, currently investigating whether additional policies are necessary to incentivize the use of RFNBOs in aviation and maritime sectors, but that's still work in progress. Then on the industry side, we are currently working on a combination of an offtake obligation for industrial hydrogen users and another OPEC subsidy for the same industrial hydrogen users to increase their use of RFNBOs above what the offtake obligation will require them to do so. And as I've said, with the current policies in place and the expected policies that we're still developing on the demand side, we're estimating to have somewhere around 1.2 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity realized in the Netherlands, and the targets that we have for the RFNBOs under the REDIII for 2030 are quite a bit higher. And one of the main explanations for the difference is that we have a lot of imports also by 2030 that we expect to be there, and we've got quite a large share of industrial hydrogen use that goes to ammonia production, and there's also a possibility that those ammonia producers will switch partially to the imports of renewable ammonia. Those are the scenarios that we are now counting on, and for the picture that I'm showing here, we've got quite a clear vision with the outlook for 2040. I think in line with the numbers that Christophe just shared, we are now working on a new what we call the National Plan for the Energy System, and a new version of it will be published by mid-September, together with the budgets for the next year. And in that plan, we will outline how we see that the volumes for the use of hydrogen until 2040 will most likely develop, and that will be the basis for the decisions on future policies. So also the industry and mobility quota after 2030, and those decisions on the new quota will, as I said, will take some more time, but we expect to take a decision on that in the coming months. So a bit more in depth on the specific RFNBO quota for both mobility and the industry, starting with the mobility quota. So what we do in the Netherlands is implementing quota specifically for the different subsectors, transport subsectors. So we divide them in road, inland shipping, and maritime shipping, and each of these sectors has a specific sub target, if you want to say so, for RFNBO use. And I think that we, as the Netherlands, are one of the few countries actually implementing different sub-targets for the different subsectors. But we see this as a means to really directly incentivize the decarbonization effort in different sectors simultaneously, instead of just starting with the cheapest option for the entire transport sector, and then afterwards doing the more expensive uses. And we see that, that's of course something that we're closely monitoring what the effects of this will be. But we see already a lot of initiatives being developed by market players in these three subsectors to ramp up the use of RFNBOs. And of course, the coming years will be very important to see whether these initiatives have actually materialize. I think, as Christopher already said, the review of the refuel mandates is quite vital. And I really want to echo the point that he made on the development of these mandates, that it would be better to have a more gradual increase instead of these 3 or 5 year steps, which we see are harder for market players to adhere to. So this is basically the design of the RFNBO quota. And then I think that there was already a question on how fines and penalties were developed. And in the Netherlands, we don't have a monetary fine that is explicitly mentioned in the legislation. But the way that we deal with non-compliance is that we actually add the missed amount, the missed volumes in the year that it's that the company doesn't adhere. We add that to the quota in the next year, and we find the companies that do not comply. So basically, when you do not meet your quota, you need to pay a fine and then do the same amount that you missed in the next year. And what we see until now is that for all the quotas were in place before we implemented the RFNBO sub-target, that it works quite well. So, I mean, we're of course monitoring the situation, and if for the RFNBO ramp up would pose a problem, we would definitely look into that. When it comes to the industry sector, I think the approach that we take is a bit more complex, mainly because we see a much lower willingness to pay. I think, as was already echoed by the other speakers, in the industry sector, apart from the refineries. So we see that the industry will rely a lot more on subsidies than the ramp up of RFNBOs in the transport sector will. And so what we have is basically a two-option approach for the demand-side policies. On the one hand, we've got an obligation, which is currently being discussed by Parliament, of only 4% by 2030. And that's really, I mean, of course, the binding target on the EU level is 42%, and that leaves a big gap. But based on the affordability and the willingness to pay, we found this to be the best compromise for actually getting the obligation in place. And then the most of the actual demand would come from the demand-side subsidies that we are currently also developing as a parallel trajectory for industrial hydrogen users to ramp up the use of RFNBOs. So basically what we will see happening, as you see on the left side, is that to cover the total funding gap, or the gap between the RFNBO hydrogen and the grey hydrogen that's currently being used by these industrial users, is that the producer or the supplier of that hydrogen already gets the subsidy through the supply side instruments that we have already implemented. And then they either need to pay the difference for the part that's under the obligation, or they can request a subsidy to cover the remainder of the funding gap. And so why is that necessary? Because we see that because of the varying willingness to pay, that the refineries and other users in the transport sector are able to match the price difference between the production cost and the supply side subsidy, while these other industrial users are not. So this is what we're currently working on. The discussion, the debate in Parliament about the obligation will be by the end of the year, and we're also expecting a decision on the demand side subsidies from the European Commission by the end of the year. So if all goes according to plan, we'll have these instruments up and running by the next year spring, and after that we can start working on the outlook for thereafter until 2040, of course, in line with any new Commission proposals that we also expect by Christmas. So thank you for your attention, and I'll give the floor back to Tobias.
Thanks a lot, Dirk, for these insights in the Dutch implementation, and also I would like to welcome back Christoph to the Q&A session. We got a lot of questions. We already tried to answer a few of them. Most likes have got a question about the penalties. So in terms of non-compliance, would the penalties be used to fund RFNBO projects, e.g. via the hydrogen bank auction as a service or other funding frameworks? I would like maybe to combine that with a question from Yasmin. She asked how Germany got to the 120 euro per gigajoule, how this number has arrived. And on the Dutch implementation, also another question on penalty mechanism. You said that the missed volumes will be needed to bring into market the following year, and you will add a fine. Can you maybe elaborate how this fine will look like? I've read somewhere that it could be up to 10% of the revenues, which will be quite high. I think the background of this question is it's of course easier to negotiate offtake agreements if you know the maximum price. For that reason, this question could be important. Who wants to start? Maybe Christoph,
Yes.
the revenues and the 120 euro per gigajoule.
Yes. I already tried to answer it, but I don't know if it worked. The height of the penalty, Tobias, you also had a slide for that comparing with other countries. In our view, the height of the penalty is, or the most important question is it high enough so that the industry is really using RFNBOs as we wanted, and not just paying the penalty, which could be the case if it's too cheap. And the 120 euros per gigajoule equals about, I didn't write it, I think it's about 13 euro per kilogram hydrogen, 13, perhaps 14. So that's a price where we think that it will be cheaper also in the beginning when the prices are still quite high to really use RFNBOs and not just pay the penalty. Also, we got a lot of positive feedback about the quite high but not exorbitant penalty. So yeah, I think it's quite a good height. I think Austria has the same, and yeah, perhaps the country. I don't know. Perhaps I will have to check, as Tobias mentioned, the last session with Poland to see what they why they chose such a low penalty. But yeah. Then the other question was actually we thought about a mechanism like this as well, that the penalties are used on the other hand as a subsidy, but in the implementation like it is now, there's no such connection. But we have subsidies, so yeah. They are probably higher than the penalties that would be paid here. So yeah, but there's no direct connection.
Yes, hopefully the final investment decisions will be made soon, so there will be no penalty needed.
Yes.
Dirk, can you elaborate a bit on the fines?
Yeah, I can. So I've got a slide showing the exact calculation. So I propose that I send that with the slides that I just presented so that you can share it. Basically, it's a combination of a couple of factors. There's a base of the fine amount, so a minimum level, which is then adjusted for both, the company that's getting the fine. Is it their first offense? How blameworthy are they? And what's the financial gain that they obtain through non-compliance? And then, of course, there's always the room for the government to have some sort of a proportionality adjustment, in which we can actually relate it to the size of the company, their income, or the relevant circumstances. So indeed, I do not personally know the number of 10% of revenues, but the main approach is that it's indeed flexible. And I totally understand that you say that it would be easier when negotiating contracts to have a fixed fine. And I'd say that the way that we're doing this now is basically because the colleagues of the infrastructure ministry have been doing this for over 10 years now, and it worked fine with, for example, the biofuels mandates. But as I said, we're monitoring this very closely, and because of the changes in the legislation that we are definitely doing because of the REDIII implementation, there will be a moment somewhere next year that we will also check whether there's a need for changes to these kinds of details in the legislation. And if so, then that would be a moment a chance to change that.
Thanks a lot for this clarification. We got some questions regarding the refinery route, and I think this is it's a bit complex, but maybe it's worth discussing that. We have different interpretations of the refinery route in Germany and in Netherlands. And there are also different use cases of hydrogen in refineries. You have the hydrocracking, where the hydrogen atom stays in the transport fuels. And then you have the desulfurization, where it's not ending up in the transport fuel. And the last one is more accounting to the industry targets, and the first one more for the transport targets. In maybe Christoph, you can elaborate a bit why you are accounting both consumptions to the transport RFNBO targets. And also an additional question to both of you. What about imports of the refinery route? For example, if I'm using RFNBOs in Antwerp, can I import these? And if the RFNBOs stay in the fuel and are imported to Germany or Netherlands, is it possible to use that to comply with the routes? I don't know who would like to start. Christoph, maybe.
Beginning with the second one, in my opinion, the one that needs to fulfill the quota is the Inverkehrbringer. What's that again in English?
Who brings the fuel into market?
Yeah, into the market, and as we have a common market, then it should be, in your example, the refinery in Antwerp or the import terminal in Antwerp. But not completely sure with that. But yeah, it should be like that. And the first one I did not get completely.
In Germany, if we have understood it correctly, the hydrogen consumption in the refinery for both desulfurization and hydrocracking can be used to be accounted on the transport RFNBO targets. Why do you have chosen that approach? And why, for example, Netherlands has not chosen to use these industry amounts also for the transport sector?
I'm not completely sure. Perhaps I have to take that with me, but I guess like the Netherlands introduced a separate goal for the industry, and we haven't. So I guess that's the reason.
Do you plan to come up with an extra industry target in future?
I can't really say something about that because there is no final position in the government yet. The main problem is, as you know, that we have like 5 or even more years of recession right now, so it's really difficult, and also this government is planning to make life easier for the industry and not to higher the costs. So there will probably in this period be no direct target. That's also not necessary, by the way. The industry target after the REDIII is a target for the member states, so we could fulfill the industry quota also without putting the obligation on every company. We have a lot of direct subsidies via the IPCEI process or others so that certain industry plants can transform, and they could, I don't know if it will be the case, but they could fulfill the industry target also for Germany.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. I was not aware of that. Dirk, how is it in the Netherlands? Is it planned to use the hydrogen demand for the refineries also in both sectors? And I think also you have reduced the obligations for the fertilizer sector. Is it right that you are not expecting that the RED III industry target of 42% by 2030 can be met?
Well, I think that there's a lot going on there. So let's unpack it. First of all, I think that the RED III industry quota for RFNBOs is extremely challenging. Not because the ambition level is wrong, but because when we made those targets, the market looked completely different than it looks now. So I really echo what Christoph says about the economic development of industry. We see that in the Netherlands as well. But we also see that discussions on quota and the direction of the market and frameworks also creates uncertainty, which then hampers investments. So what we try with the industry quota is balancing, this need for certainty about how the market develops, while not pushing the industry over the edge with extra costs. That as a context, the concrete answers to your questions is that we're currently not planning on increasing the transport quota to cover the industry quota, but of course we see that as a technical option to increase the use of RFNBOs in refineries to help meet the industry quota. Because what we're currently discussing with Parliament is, what the entire mix for RFNBO use in industry is, and main points of discussion is whether quota are indeed the way forward, and specifically what you mentioned is exemption for ammonia producers of fertilizers, which we in the current proposal have partially proposed, but it is really a political discussion to do so. And based on the scenarios that we now have, we see that there's a chance that we actually meet the targets when the 60% exemption for ammonia production is applied, and if the European Commission agrees on that, and there's sufficient import. So I'd say that we're planning for the best case to meet the targets, but it will of course be extremely difficult, and we have to see this fall what the political compromise will be, and after that we will look further.
Do you expect any market distortions? Because, for example, you have an RFNBO target for the maritime sector. Belgium is discussing that as well, but Germany, for example, has not implemented additional targets for the maritime sector, and ships can bunker fuels easily somewhere else. So is it a disadvantage for the Dutch fuel shipping market?
This is a really interesting question, because there's two sides of the story. So yes, there's definitely the opportunity for ships to bunker somewhere else, and we see that already happening in the Netherlands last year. So a level playing field, as with other quota and targets, is crucial. So that's really what we try to advocate. On the other hand, we think that there's also a value in being a front runner in these kind of issues and leading the way. So what we really try to do is discuss with other member states what direction we should take, and it's also about building a new market. So we're currently really investigating, okay, what is the value of this this bunkering position? How does it match what we try to do with the development of new eFuel supplies? And I think the cooperation with the Belgian government until now has been very, very good. So there's also spoken about the intention to implement this quota. And when it comes to the upcoming proposals for revision of the REDIII and the reviews of the refuel mandates, I think that would be one of the key issues to discuss with other member states. So I think this level playing field in place is quite vital.
Maybe Christoph, short answer, is Germany planning to introduce a maritime target in addition? I know it has been a discussion in the parliamentary negotiations.
Yes, there was a discussion to include it in the GHG quota, and which we didn't. Also, there was a discussion to opt in for the refineries, so they can choose if they also want to use maritime fuels for that. But that also didn't happen because of the competition between the refineries, and for some it would be easier than for others. And also a big discussion was that the most important thing would be that we are in line here with our neighboring countries that are important in the shipping sector. So of course with the Netherlands, of course with Belgium and Denmark. So perhaps now that the Netherlands introduced such a quota, I don't actually know the situation in the other countries I mentioned. That's also a possibility. I don't know about that yet, but yeah, perhaps.
Thanks a lot. I think since the IMO discussions are on hold or blocked at the moment, I think it would be a good incentive to implement additional maritime targets. I think we could continue discussing all the details, and we have many open questions, but this webinar was just scheduled for an hour. For that reason, I would like to have a final round, and maybe we can wrap up and summarize a bit what are our lesson learned from the RED III implementation in Germany and Netherlands, and also looking ahead on the RED IV, which we are expecting in Q4 from the Commission. What could be your proposals for RED IV? As eFuel Alliance, we are definitely recommending a more single market for RFNBOs. We don't need 27 different penalty systems, different multipliers, different sectors which are addressed. So more harmonization would be definitely required. And of course, targets until 2050 for RFNBOs would be nice for long-term investment decisions. Maybe starting with you again, Christoph, what would be your summary and outlook on the Renewable Energy Directive?
Yes, of course, that is the questions. If we really need all these different rules that make it very complex, especially for companies that take part in a lot of that are making business in a lot of countries. I don't know. It always depends if we have which kind of regulation we have here, and we have a directive here, so it only has a certain level of a certain level for the member states, and the rest is up to the member states. But I don't understand also why, for example, the penalty here is up to discussion. I think it would be easier for the market to have a whole level for the whole European Union there. Perhaps that can be a goal for the RED IV then. We have, of course, the goal in the RED IV to implement the things we did now with our national implementation. So of course the goal until the quotas until 2040, and also the incentives we made for RFNBOs and for electrolytic low carbon hydrogen. But yeah, we did not see any drafts until now, so I don't know in which direction this is going.
Thanks a lot. That's a really positive message for the 2040 targets, at least. Dirk, do you already have some lesson learned and expectation for RED IV? I know it's not a governmental position and everything is on discussion.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that the two main lessons that we learned in the last couple of years. And I mean, the first is that for this market to develop, you really need targets So it's really a regulated market. So without any RFNBO targets, there will be no RFNBOs. So we really see that moving forward, there should be targets for RFNBOs to actually for something to happen. But then what we also saw is that the RFNBO market in itself is way more challenging and way more surprising than we had expected. We compared it to wind and solar when we started, and it turned out to be nothing like it. So I'd say that the key word for the next framework should be adaptiveness and predictability, in a sense that this discussion that we now have on the delegated act is a nice example, because we are now talking about changing those rules because the underlying assumptions have changed. So I think that the European Commission should be very clear on what assumptions it makes when setting the framework, so that everybody knows that when those assumptions change, that the rules should also change. And in that way, you can prevent, this period of uncertainty when everybody knows that there's a change coming up and nobody knows what the change is going to be or whether there will be a change. So that's actually, I think, a very important lesson that we've learned and we should take into account when, deciding on the new framework. Because I think what we really need to do is find the right balance between, certainty, having a visibility on quota, until 2040 or maybe even further, but also the flexibility to, change in a predictable manner those quota when, developments call for that. And lastly, I really want to echo what you said on simplicity. I think that we really need to check whether everything is manageable for companies, and I think leaving a little less room for implementation on the national level should be open for discussion, because I think that would really make implementation and ramp up more easy.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I still fear that there are ideological positions behind the delays and the complexity which we see. There's no surprise, and it's not a coincidence that the delegated acts are that restrictive, that we need additionality, temporal and geographical correlation, a ban of CO2 sources for hydrogen and derivatives, but not for, I don't know, electric cars or heat pumps. So different technologies are treated quite differently here. And we definitely need to get faster. I think the REDIII Commission proposal was in 2021 or 2022, and we still have member states who have not implemented it completely. So, and I understand each company who cannot invest billions when a regulation is missing here. With that, I would like to thank again you, Dirk, and Christoph, for the presentations and the interesting discussions. I'm sorry that we have taken 10 minutes more than scheduled, but I think it was quite interesting, and we will send around the presentations. I've also seen that you answered a lot of questions in the chat. And I'm sure we will stay in contact because, RED 4 is already ahead of us. Wish you a good week and see you soon. Thanks for your participation. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Yep. Have a good day.